Alright, hello lovely people. Today I'm gonna cook up something really spicy for you guys. I'm gonna talk about Kayle runes, and I'm gonna talk about what the best item builds are and what you can do. Before I get into it, I want to say that Kayle in the preseason has been very lackluster, and this is because the way Kayle's Righteous Fury works, or has worked, is that you need, I think it was 37.5% cooldown reduction for a permanent E uptime. And the reason why that wasn't a problem until the preseason was because you could just arrange your runes to give you a whole bunch of cooldown reduction, and then once you bought your Nashor's Tooth, that was enough, and you didn't really need anything else. And if you wanted to buy more cooldown reduction, like a Lichbane, then you could alter your rune page to give you less cooldown reduction, and you could balance it out like that. Now in the preseason, you haven't been able to do that, because you can't actually get that much cooldown reduction from these new rune pages. Transcendence only gives you 10%, and even if you go all in and get something like Kleptomancy, I think you're still only going to end up at 35%, which is still not a permanent E uptime. So what that does for Kayle players is it kind of leaves them in the dust, because what Kayle players have had to accept is that you're either just not going to have your Righteous Fury up at all times in a late game team fight, which can be game changing, or you're going to be forced into Lichbane. Now the thing about Kayle is that her build is kind of set in stone as far as the first two items go, and mostly also with your boots. So, because you kind of have to get Nashor's and Rageblade. So if you put in another item on top of that, like Lichbane, then you're really limiting the creativity of the players, because they can't buy anything else, which means that 99% of all Kayle games you're going to play, you're going to be buying the exact same items, which, number one, it's really boring, and number two, it completely removes any aspect of adaptive itemization from the game, because you can't be buying items depending on what your team needs, or depending on what you're playing against, or depending on who's fed anymore. You just can't do that when you have to buy Lichbane every game because of cooldown reduction. So, finally, in patch 8.1, Riot decided to change this, and basically what they did is they upped the cooldown on Righteous Fury in the early game, but they lowered it in the late game with levels. In other words, if you max it first, then you're going to be good to go, and you don't need as much cooldown reduction anymore for a permanent uptime. Now, I have calculated it myself, and right now the state of Righteous Fury is that you need, I believe it is 28.5% cooldown reduction for permanent uptime. Now, for Season 8, that basically just translates to 30%, because everything has been rounded up and rounded down as far as cooldown reduction goes to be 5 or 10 or 20%. So right now, all you need for permanent Righteous Fury is 30% CDR, which means, thank God, you can now go Transcendence and buy a Nashor's Tooth, and then you're good to go. Yes, please. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, we can actually think about some item builds, and that's the really juicy part of this video, but I'm going to be going over the runes first, because I feel like it has to be done. What is the best keystone? Let's start with the keystones. Well, really, you have two options, and that is between Press the Attack and Lethal Tempo. Statistically speaking, Lethal Tempo is slightly better than Press the Attack. In the patch that changed the CDR thing with Righteous Fury, Kayle's base attack speed was simultaneously nerfed, which means getting Press the Attack off is slightly harder now than it was before, which ups the value of Lethal Tempo, and also Lethal Tempo is just straight damage. There's just nothing to sneeze at there. So personally, for me, I think Lethal Tempo is a little stronger, and I like it better. It suits my playstyle better, and I like having the passive to play around. I think it's kind of nice, and it can be really strong in a 1v1. I've also seen that the best Kayle players in the world happen to be using lethal tempo in every game right now. But you can go press the attack. If you prefer that, then you can definitely do that. You also have other options for your keystones, but those are more niche. You can go stuff like fleet footwork. You can also go phase rush if you really want to. And if you want to be a gangplank imitator, you can go kleptomancy. These are all viable options, but for me, I think lethal tempo is it's what I use, and I think it's really, really good. As for the rest of the runes in this tree, it's pretty much a given. You have to go Triumph, you have to go Alacrity, and you have to go Coup de Grace. There's no real alternative in any of these rows, so there's not much to talk about there. I mean, if you're a complete maniac, then you can go Last Stand, but I just don't think it's as reliable a rune as the other one. Then we go Transcendence, because we're not buying Lichbane. If you are buying Lichbane, you can go Transcendence still, and you'll just have 40% cooldown reduction instead of 30. But you can also just forgo Transcendence entirely if you wish. I'm gonna go with this, because it suits my item builds. And then your other option really is between Monoflow Band and the Ultimate Hat. In terms of raw power, these are basically completely interchangeable, and you can pick whichever one you want based on your personal preference. Monoflow Band is very good for sustain purposes, and Ultimate Hat is just, obviously, it's just lower cooldown on your ultimate. So if that's what you want, then there you go. So pick one of these two and go Transcendence, and you're going to have the perfect setup for the exact item builds that I'm going to be talking about in a second. So, going to the item set, as you can see, as per usual with all of my item sets that I use, I have starting items and consumables up top, and then here we have the interesting parts. I should say, first of all, the way you start the game on Kayle is gonna be rushing Berserkers and then going into Nashers and Rageblade. This is what gives you what is required for a Kayle to function, essentially. You need those three items, especially Nashers and Rageblade. That combo, the damage that you get out of that combo is just crucial. Now, it's not the only thing that you can do, but it is the way that you're gonna be starting your games 90% of the time, basically. The only other thing that I would do personally is if I was playing against a hard magic damage matchup, like if I'm playing Kayle in the mid lane and I'm versing a Katarina, for example. Katarina's really broken right now, by the way. I would rush a Wit's End. I would even forgo the Berserker Greaves. I would just rush the Wit's End, and then after the Wit's End, I would get the Rageblade. Because you need the magic resist from Wit's End, first of all, but the damage combo is also just insane. And you can't actually go Wit's End into Nashers and then get Rageblade as your third big item. And the reason why you can't do that is because the Nashor's Tooth Rageblade, the Nashor's Tooth Wit's End damage combo is just really low, and there's no real justification for it. Because Kayle is the kind of champion that needs two full items to function, which actually takes a fairly long time to get there. So if you substitute that damage spike for the utility that Nashers would get you, you're just not going to have the same power spike that you need in the mid game to function as a champion. So if you're not getting Nashor's Tooth early, if you are getting Wit's End, you're gonna have to switch out the build order so that you get the Rageblade first, and your build order would probably look something like this, or maybe you'd have Zerkers in between the two starting items depending on how much you value the mobility. But that is the magic resist start. And if you're playing against something that is just really heavy CC like Galio, you can also consider buying Merc Treads. But for most of your games, you're going to be starting like this because it does give you the smoothest and most powerful power spike. As for the rest of your items, you can be fairly creative. Like I said, you don't need to limit yourself to CDR items like Lichbane or even Trinity Force. So this leaves you with a whole bunch of options. The first thing I want to say is that I don't have Runan's Hurricane listed here, but Runan's Hurricane is extremely strong, and you definitely should consider it if you like using the item. The reason why I don't have it listed is because I have tried playing with Runon's Hurricane quite a bit, and it just doesn't suit my playstyle. I just don't like how it feels. And at the end of the day, an item can be statistically the best item in the game, but if it feels wrong to me, I'm not going to play with it. And Runon's Hurricane just doesn't suit me, because it is an AoE item, and the way I like to play Kayle is I like to have as much single target damage as I can, which is why I love Wit's End so much. Wit's End is the best magic resist item you can get, so if you need magic resist, you should get this item. It works really well for shredding tanks and squishies alike, so regardless of what team you're playing against, it's a really handy item. Speaking of killing tanks, the best items you can buy on Kayle for killing tanks are Wit's End, Rylai's, and Blade of the Ruined King. Rylai's is really good for peeling and for utility in general. If you are playing against something that's really hard to lock down in team fights, like an Echo, for example, Rylai's can be extremely powerful. Or if you know that the game is going to be dependent on whether or not you can peel for your AD carry, then Rylai's is also a really good purchase. As far as tank killing goes, obviously the percentage health on hit damage from Blade of the Ruined King has insane synergy with Rageblade, and is, in my opinion, a superior purchase to something like a Wit's End, or not a Wit's End, sorry, a Void Staff. You can go Void Staff, and Void Staff has the advantage of being much cheaper than Blade of the Ruined King, but I think at the end of the day, if you're playing Kayle, you want to scale hard, and you may as well just get the best item for the purpose. You might be wondering, why not something like Rylai's Liandry's? And my answer to that question is, it is a viable item combo, but still I think Blade of the Ruined King just does the same job, but better. Because the burn damage from Liandry's doesn't actually scale with attack speed, but the percentage health damage on Blade of the Ruined King does. Also, the active is kind of handy, although that's not really why you're buying the item. Okay, so those are like the peeling slash utility slash tank killer options that you have. Next up we have Guardian Angel. This is probably the best item you can get for your 6th item, your final purchase. Just generally speaking, I don't have much else to say about it. It's just really, really good. Then we have something like Gunblade. Gunblade is extremely high damage, but it also gives you the most damage and defense you can get out of the same item, out of the same item purchase, because the healing from Gunblade is really nice, and it works extremely well in conjunction with Wit's End and even your other items, because it heals off of everything, which means it heals off of your on-hit damage as well, and because your on-hit damage is single target, it heals for the full 15%. Now, the raw damage you're getting out of Gunblade with the active and just the stats alone is kinda nuts. It's basically the death cap of the hybrid builds. So, Gunblade is a really nice option. It's not that useful against super tanky teams, but if you're playing against a squishy team, then Gunblade can just destroy, and it can be a good defensive tool. The last option I want to mention is Mercurial Scimitar / QSS. I hate buying this item, but sometimes you just have to do it, because you're playing against Malzahar, or maybe something else that needs to be cleansed. And if that's the situation I'm put in, then I will buy the item. So that's it. You have a few defensive options, and then basically you just try and build as much damage as you can while adapting to the game, the different games and the different situations. So when you're building on Kayle, you have to ask, what does my team need? What do I need to be a successful team fighter? And what am I playing against? And how do I counter that? If you're playing against Alistar and Maokai, you're probably going to build something like Blade of the Ruined King Wit's End, or Blade of the Ruined King Rylai's, and then get a GA afterwards. Or hell, if you don't feel like you need the GA, you can just buy all 3 tank killer items. So that's the way you build Kayle right now, or I build Kayle. This is the best, most powerful way to do it, if you are sort of the average person. Although I do have kind of a little secret build at the bottom that I've discovered that I have not seen anyone else do, but it's actually the best Kayle build I've ever tried. It's so good. I guess I'm gonna show it to you. Let's let the cat out of the bag. Okay. What the hell is this? And why have I been saving it for last? What is Static Shiv Infinity Edge doing on my Kayle? Well, the answer to that question is damage. Lots and lots of damage. This might look weird to you. You might not think that this makes any sense or has any synergy whatsoever. But my answer to that is, it is big, big fucking damage. Okay, this is actually insane. I have never tried a Kayle build in my life that kicks as much ass as this build right here. I'm not even joking. Between the attack speed and the on-hit damage you get out of Righteous Fury, Gnasher's Tooth, and Rageblade, and the pure insane burst damage you get from Static Shiv and Infinity Edge, if you're trying to 1v1 a squishy champion, I swear to God, if you have full build, or even just these 5 items, you will 2-shot people. I have played with this build against a full item Vayne, and I was split pushing, and I just 3-shot her in a 1v1, and she couldn't do anything. Actually, I 2-shot her, but the Static Shiv procced off of the minions, and dealt damage as well, so I guess that's technically a 3-shot if you want to be picky about it. It's a really, really strong build. I know it looks kind of nuts, but seriously, please don't write it off before you try it for yourself, because it's actually insane. It has 2 downsides or 2 caveats that I need to mention though. First of all, the tank killer potential of this build is not very high. You are stacking a fair amount of attack speed, so it can kill tanks, but that's not really what it's made for. And it's definitely not as effective for killing tanks as something like Wit's End or Blade of the Ruined King would be. So if you're playing against that, you know, Alistar support, and you have to plow through him every single teamfight to get anywhere, I probably wouldn't recommend going with this build. And the other thing I need to mention is that it's very, very low on defenses. Really, the only defense you're getting out of this build is the movement speed from Static Shiv, hilariously. Until you have Guardian Angel, that is. So, if you're a bad Kayle player, or if you're still learning the game or learning the champion, if you don't know what proper teamfight positioning is, you shouldn't be going with this build, because you're going to be killing yourself every single fight. I can pretty much guarantee it. But if you are good at Kayle, if you are a bit of a veteran and you know what you're doing, this build is basically free low. So, it looks crazy, but trust me, this is the highest damage build against a squishy team that you can possibly make, and your jaw will drop when you see its effectiveness. It's actually hilarious. And I think that's about all I have to say about it. You could build this right here and then just switch out your Static Shiv for a Runan's Hurricane, and then you'd have kind of a more of a balanced build. You're not going to be 2-shotting people though, because the passive from Static Shiv is actually kind of important for doing that. Or at least it makes a difference, whereas Runan's Hurricane is also AoE like the Static Shiv, but it has no single target potential like Static Shiv has. So, yeah, go with whatever you think is best and whatever feels better for you. For me, Static Shiv is the superior choice, and that's about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this lovely, destructive Season 8 Kayle cocktail, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Peace.